Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm grateful we got to have church together today. This is fun. It's a little different. Okay, this morning I'm going to start off with a word of prayer, if I could, please. Father, in the same way that I prayed in preparation for this talk, I now pray again, asking you to please help me to find your truth, that I might present your truth to your people. Amen. If you have your Bible, please turn to 2 Kings chapter 5. And while you're turning, I'll give you a little bit of background. Today's story takes place in the northern kingdom of Israel, somewhere around 850 BC. So that's about 850 years before Jesus was born. This is near the time when Homer wrote about the Trojan War, which had taken place a couple hundred years earlier. And you might have seen the movie Troy, that Brad Pitt, based in part on Homer's writings. That's this time period. It's also near the same time some of the pyramids in Egypt were being built. The location of the story is actually near where Jesus later traveled, like when he met the woman at the well. It takes place after the Hebrew kingdom established by David has been split into two parts, which happened after Solomon's reign. So we're going to read a story in 2 Kings chapter 5. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and taken a young girl from Israel. Taken captive a young girl from Israel. And she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servant went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it? How much more then, when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean, like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he's leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." "Go in peace," Elisha said. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, and the man of God, said to him, "My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean. by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him." So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from his chariot to meet him. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is all right," Gehazi answered. "My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing." "By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them, and then tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. When he went in and stood before his master, Elisha asked him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" "Your servant didn't go anywhere," Gehazi answered. But Elisha said to him, "Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes, or olive groves and vineyards, or flocks and herds, or male and female slaves? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever." Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. So, Naaman's an important person. Basically, he's one of the most important members of the king of Aram's cabinet. But he's got a problem. He's got skin disease. One of his wife's slaves, though, knows that God does incredible things through Elisha. So she tells Naaman's wife that he can be healed. And she tells her husband. You can tell he's pretty desperate because he goes to the king asking for a letter of introduction to go be healed in the very country his country had been raiding, even stealing their children. He takes some serious treasure with him: 10 full sets of clothes, 340 kilograms of silver, and 68 kilograms of gold. That's almost as much gold as I weigh. In modern trading, the silver's worth over 250,000 Canadian, and the gold's worth just under 4 million. You can imagine he traveled in quite a caravan to protect this treasure. After all, he's the commander of the armies of Aram. The king of Israel is shocked to receive this dignitary. He thinks his neighboring kingdom is seeking a pretext to invade Israel. Tearing one's robes was a means of expressing intense distress in ancient Israel, and he gives him a rip. But Elisha finds out about this. Elisha's probably my favorite prophet in the Bible. He has a quiet authority from God. He's not loud or bombastic, but seems like the type who speaks softly, yet wields incredible power. He was Elijah's protege, and when Elijah was taken up to heaven, Elisha asked to be blessed with a double portion of Elijah's blessing. This story is just one of the examples of how God honored his request. Elisha listened to God, and God listened to Elisha. They had a good relationship. So Elisha says to the king, "Why are you stressing? Send Naaman to me." Here's a perfect example of why I like Elisha. Most of us love to meet important people. And here, at Elisha's door, is one of the most important people in the entire region. But Elisha doesn't even bother to go to the door of his own house. Instead, he sends out a messenger to tell Naaman, "Go dip in the local river 7 times. The Bible doesn't actually tell us whom Elisha sends. But there's a servant that's been with Elisha for a long time named Gehazi. Gehazi and Elisha have actually been through a lot together. I think Gehazi was Elisha's protege in the same way Elisha had been Elijah's. And I think he represented Elisha to Naaman at this moment in this story. I just can't know that for sure, but that's what I think. So Naaman is told, "Go dip in the local river." Now, Naaman's an important guy. And he's come to see this man from God with much pomp and wealth. But the man of God didn't even bother to come and talk to him, or to do any of the fancy things Naaman expected him to do. So he's frustrated. In fact, he drives off in a rage, the Bible says. He storms off, disparaging how useless this insignificant country is compared with his great own country, and refuses to humiliate himself any further. Fortunately, however, he's got some pretty smart servants. They understand humility. Evidently, they also have their master's ear, because they say, just do it. What harm is there in trying? So Naaman does. He goes down to the water, he dips 7 times. And you can imagine his surprise when he's healed. He's healed. He's got a life-debilitating disease. And God brings healing to him because he went and he obeyed what the guy said, and he dipped in the water. You can imagine his joy. So here's this man filled with joy, and he goes running back. It's a very different conversation that he has. First off, he's not talking to the servant anymore. Elisha actually comes out to talk to him. But look at how he's changed. Physically he's changed. He's now healed. But he comes back not as a dignitary, not as an important person, not as someone full of pomp and wealth and all the rest of it. No. Now he's coming as a humble, submissive man who's just been touched by the hand of God. That is a beautiful thing. And I want to point out that Naaman says some very important words, rather revolutionary in his time. Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. And out of the expanse of his wealth and treasure, he offers a gift to Elisha. But Elisha, in typical form, won't take it. Elisha's not awed by impressive people, and he's not interested in worldly wealth. Elisha's fantastic. Then Naaman says something a little strange that may need some context. He says he wants to haul off a load of dirt to take back with him. Dirt? What Naaman, like I said, what Naaman said is fairly revolutionary in his time. In that time, people thought that gods were local. For example, if you flip back a few pages in your Bible, you'll see that a generation earlier, in 1 Kings chapter 20, the king of Aram lost a battle to the Israelites in the mountains. So he decided to go to war with them in the plains because he thought the God of Israel was the God of the mountains and not the God of the plains. To prove he's the God of everything, God intervened and handed the victory to Israel in the plains, as well as to demonstrate that he was not restricted by geography, even though the king that he helped out was an evil man. But Naaman still doesn't understand that part. So Naaman said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. All the rest of the gods in other countries weren't gods at all. The God in Israel is the only God there is. He doesn't understand that God is not limited to Israel, but he's halfway there. He recognizes that the God that is in Israel is the only God there is. So he wants to take some of Israel back with him when he goes home, so he can spread it on the ground and offer sacrifices and worship the one true God on a little piece of Israel. He gets that there's only one God. He just thinks that God is still somehow tied to the ground. He's halfway there. Let's give him some credit. Elisha says, scooting further down, Elisha, at the conclusion of the conversation, he goes into some stuff about, I got this issue and I got to deal with this, and is everything okay with, can I still serve the Lord? And actually, there's something important here too that I don't want to go into depth on, but I want to touch on. He uses God's name. So translators use the Lord, but he's talking about the one true God, the creator, the creator of the universe. He's talking about Yahweh. And Elisha says to him, go in peace. If only our story ended there. It's a good news story. But it's not completely. Gehazi's a little worked up. He cites the injustice of it all. It's not fair, My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. He sees that this is not fair. What Elisha is asking is not fair. What Elisha is doing is not right. And so he's going to step in and he's going to do something about it. Of course, that's sort of his pretext. I don't think that's his real heart. I think his real heart is he's not like Elisha. He is awed by important people. He is caught up in chasing after wealth. These things are important to him. Little does he know that Elisha is watching. So Naaman comes down from his chariot and actually gives him twice what he asks for. He asks for 1 talent of silver, and Naaman gives him 2 and a couple sets of clothes. Gehazi thought he knew better than Elisha. So he sneaks around. But really what he's doing is he's rebelling. Somebody told me once, I don't know if it's a famous quote or something, but I think it's pretty clever. If you're trying to keep something a secret, it's probably something you shouldn't be doing. That applies here. Okay, so I looked up the word rebel, looking at rebel, because this is about, like what I'm trying to say here is it's a distinction between from a bigger picture. This is a story of Naaman, who was healed, and Gehazi, who rebelled. Naaman was healed because he submitted. And Gehazi was eventually afflicted with the sickness because he rebelled. It's a story of submission versus rebellion versus submission. So I looked at the word rebellion, to rebel. You look at the intransitive verbs. It means to oppose or disobey one in authority or control. That fits. Some of these don't. But in another one, to act in or show opposition or disobedience, like rebelling against conventions of a polite society. These are examples of rebellion. This is what Gehazi is doing. He's rejecting Elisha and Elisha's leadership, and he's rebelling. On contrast, if I look at the word submit, it can be used as both a transitive and an intransitive verb. As a transitive verb, it means to yield to governance or authority. And there's some other definitions that are not as helpful. But as an intransitive verb, I think these really fit. To yield oneself to the authority or will of another, or to surrender. To permit yourself to be subjected to something, or to defer, or to consent, or abide by the opinion or authority of another. So the contrast here is between the rebellion of Gehazi and the submission of Naaman. Here's some synonyms of the word submit. Yield, to capitulate, to succumb, relent, defer. They all mean give way to someone or something that no longer, to give way to something no longer, defer. These all mean to give way to someone or something that one no longer resists. So at the start of our story, Naaman was resisting Elisha. He was not willing to do what Elisha wanted him to do. But in the end, he was convinced, and he switched over, and he no longer resisted. Okay, so rebellion and submission. This story is very good at pointing out to us that rebellion against God's representative is the same thing as rebellion against God. Another example you might know about is in Numbers 12, where some of the people, Moses' siblings rebel against him, and God strikes Miriam with leprosy. That's another example of leprosy here. Because God is considering that rebellion against those in authority over her is rebellion against God himself. There's an important aspect of this, though, that I want to point out that comes out of this story. And that is, God's representative is not always right. Naaman submitted actually 2 times. 2 times he submitted. The first time he said, no, I'm not going to submit, and ran off. But then he did what Elisha said. Now, Elisha sent a messenger to him, probably Gehazi. So this messenger comes and says to him, go wash. And so at first he resists, and then he submits. So then later, Gehazi comes to him again. How is he supposed to know which one is the time that God's talking to him? How is he supposed to know that God's not talking to him the second time? So he submits again. Of course, he's very happy to do it because he's super grateful, and he's looking for an excuse to try and be generous here. But I guess what I'm saying is, he's submissive whether or not God's representative is right in making the request. I want to give a head nod. I don't want to get into this topic, but I do want to address something. There is such a thing as ungodly and unjust, abusive leadership, and I'm not saying that that in general we should be blindly obeying. I'm just saying that we choose to obey, and if you find yourself in a bad situation, get out from under that bad leadership. But don't give lip service to obedience while living in rebellion. That, I think, is my little caveat here. God is calling us to live lives of submission to Him. But He doesn't always talk to us directly. And often, He calls us to live in lives of submission to Him by living lives in submission to other people. And even those who are in charge of other things have somebody else that they're submitted to. It's this, domino's the wrong way to say it because they don't fall. But what I'm saying, I guess, is that nobody lives without being under submission to somebody else. And the wisdom that God has in speaking to them. One of the few examples of exceptions might be Moses, but that's a serious exception. All of us live under submission. And we can choose to live under submission, or we can choose to live in rebellion. Now, this is kind of funny to me. There's an interesting story that has an amazing parallel to me, a parable that Jesus told that's very similar in story. In Matthew 21, 28-32, you don't have to turn there, but you can if you want to. Jesus is talking to the chief priests and the elders of the people. And he says, they basically were having a bit of an argument. They'd come and they made some complaints about him. And Jesus says to them, what do you think? There was a man who had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, son, go and work today in the vineyard. I will not, he answered. But later he changed his mind and he went. Then the father went to the other son and said the same thing. He answered, I will, sir. But he did not go. Which of the 2 did what his father wanted? The first, they answered. Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes did. And even after you saw this, you did not repent and believe him. The tax collectors and the prostitutes, he's referring to, are the rejects of that day. They're the rejects of that society, the sinners. But it was the chief priests and the elders who were the ones who were rebelling against God in this story. The Bible is full of stories about people who ought to be getting it right, getting it wrong. And the people who have in the past gotten it wrong, but now they're getting it right. That encourages me. It gives me hope. Jesus' point is, that these people are living lives of rebellion, while those that everybody else is rejecting is living a life of submission. Now, submission is not easy. In some ways, we're being asked to say, I don't want to do this, but out of submission to God, I will. It's one of those 4-letter words. Okay. There's a right question and a wrong question in this. And that may sound strange, and I'll read you my right question. My right question is, do I submit or do I rebel? That's what we are faced with. You are faced with the question, do you submit or do you rebel? And that sounds obvious until you hear the wrong question. The wrong question is this person right to ask this of me? Does this person have the right to ask this of me? Well, that's the wrong question to ask. When you're in a situation of authority, you don't ask the question whether or not they have the right, whether or not they're right, whether or not God is actually speaking through them this time. Really what you do is you have to recognize that when you're under authority, you have to submit to that authority. And they may not even be right. They may not even be right. You have to make a choice of whether or not you're under authority. But once you're under that authority, and as long as you're under that authority, you must choose to submit to that authority. That is my argument today. Even when Gehazi made a wrong request, Naaman submitted. And I suggest that he was right in doing so. And had he not, he may have even been violating God. Because as far as he was concerned, Gehazi was speaking to him the words of God. Gehazi was wrong. He was not, in fact, speaking the words of either Elisha or God. But to Naaman he was. And Naaman did the right thing. And Naaman submitted a second time. All right. So I have some questions I figured that you can ask yourself. Am I giving lip service without following through? Am I hiding something in my life? Am I truly submitting to those God has appointed over me and thereby submitting to God? Where in my life am I rebelling?